All right, well, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you here today for actually our first of the season of our Presidential Primary Sources Project programs. Today's program is called The War of 1812, and it's being presented by Patrick Martin from Andrew Jackson's Hermitage, sorry. The Presidential Primary Sources Project is a series we put on every year. And it's a collaboration between Internet2, the National Archives, and the National Park Service. So the presenters are always from either the National Archives or the National Park Service. And then I work at Internet2, and I'm kind of your moderator today. So if there's anything you need, please drop it in the chat, and I'll be happy to help make things work for you. This is just a quick disclaimer. By participating today, all participants are agreeing to be recorded and streamed and archived as part of our program. We do record each of our programs, and then it's available on our YouTube channel so that teachers and students can access it later. As we get started today, I just want to review a few expectations in regards to participation. We absolutely want you to participate as much as possible. It's much more fun that way. So please participate. For those of you who are participating via video, if you would like to ask a question, you can either just raise your hand in the video, drop us a chat, and we'll help. You should be able to unmute yourself, but if you need help, just let us know. And for students who want to just participate via audio, so not share their video, there's a little raise your hand function. It's like a little red hand you can raise, and we'll use that to call on you and help you unmute. And then if you are participating via the chat, everyone has access to the chat. So if you haven't found it, it looks like a little caption bubble. Go ahead and click on that. We will use that and look for your responses and questions there as well. As I said again, please participate as much as possible, but just also try to be respectful of these interactive tools, and especially in the chat box. We want to be able to address as many thoughts and questions as we can. So please keep your responses focused on what the presenter is asking for. Right, and then just one last thank you. We're so excited to have you again. This is our website. Like I said, this is our first program of our series, and they're every Tuesday and Thursday all the way through the beginning of April. So if you haven't already, check out some of the other ones. All right, before I hand it over, I want to mention one last thing. If you would like to be able to share your video, which we would love, please just go ahead and chat us, and I will promote you to a panelist so we can see your video. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Patrick to get started.
Thanks, Therese. My name is Patrick. I am from Andrew Jackson's Hermitage. So today I'm going to be talking to y'all about the War of 1812. War of 1812 is one of those things that isn't really taught all that much in schools anymore. Certainly when I was in school, we didn't really learn about it all that much. But it is one of the aspects of Jackson's life that really propelled him into national fame. Before he was the president, before he was even a senator or anybody that we would know, he was the general of the War of 1812. So we're going to look at that experience. We're going to look at kind of how Jackson gets sparked into national fame and what that means for him going forward. So the War of 1812, while it does start in 1812, the conflict that kind of sparks it really starts sooner. And it starts with 1807. Now, we already fought a war against Great Britain, right? We fought in the Revolutionary War. We got our independence from Great Britain. But that country wasn't recognizing our freedom. They were still trying to tell us how to run our government and run our country. And they were going as far as stealing our troops. This example right here in 1807, the HMS Leopard, which is a British ship, came over and it fired upon the USS Chesapeake, which is an American naval ship. There were 4 soldiers on board the USS Chesapeake that were born before the Revolutionary War. And Great Britain viewed anybody born before the Revolutionary War as a British subject and not a US citizen. So they boarded the ship, they took those 4 sailors, they prosecuted them, and they went as far as executing one of the men. They killed him for abandoning his country. Americans are outraged, right? You can't come over here and steal our troops, especially when we're not in a time of war. So this kind of is what sparks America to want to fight against Great Britain, right? The country is crying out that we need to go to war, we need to retaliate, and we need to secure our freedom from Great Britain once and for all. Thomas Jefferson was president at this time, and he didn't want to go to war. We were still a very young, new country. We're still trying to pay off the debts from the Revolutionary War, so he didn't think that going into another war would be a good idea. And that's why we don't have the War of 1807, we have the War of 1812. And the War of 1812 is called America's Duel. So if you've ever heard of a duel, it's when two men would disagree at the time. They would take pistols, they would mark their paces, they'd turn and they would shoot at each other. And this is to settle any arguments, to settle any kind of disputes that they would have in defending their own honor. Well, America had been insulted, right? Our sailors being taken by Great Britain not seeing our freedom as true. We were insulted. We needed to defend our honor, and that's what sends us to war. So a lot of people will call it America's Duel. And there are two men that I want to point out, Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun. These two men were senators that go into the Senate with the sole purpose of trying to get us to declare war, because the president of the United States is not the person that declares war. The president is in charge of our armed forces. They're the commander in chief, but they're not the one that declares war. Only Congress can do that. So these men go into Congress and they're what we call war hawks. They go in there crying out for a war, trying to get America to declare war against Great Britain. And finally, it happens in 1812. And this is what a lot of Americans thought the War of 1812 was going to look like. On the left, you have King George III, the King of Great Britain. On the right, you have President Madison, the President of the United States. They're representing each of their own countries, so Great Britain and America fighting against each other. But what are some things you notice about this image? You can either drop it in the chat, or for those of you that have audio or video on, you can raise your hand and we'll moderate that. How about Pine Room? I saw quite a few hands from there.
Lynn, did you want to come up? I saw yours first. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. I noticed that King George has a black eye and I think a bloody nose too.
Right? He's got a black eye, he's got a bloody nose, kind of an impossible amount of blood coming from his nose, right? It's not real. But what they're saying is he's getting beaten up, right? Great Britain is being beaten up by America. What else do you notice?
Yeah, go ahead. We see your hand raised.
Would you like to know?
Their hands and not how they used to.
Can you repeat that?
They're fighting with their fists and not how they used to do it, like with weapons and stuff.
Right? So we know that war is not fought with fists between the leaders of each country on the shores of a beach, right? I feel like a lot more probably would be solved if it was, but it's not. What they're saying is it's a very personal war. It's a war like we've never fought before, because we already fought a war against Great Britain, but now we're fighting them again to get our independence once and for all. So yes, it is very important to notice that they're fighting with their fists. That's not typically how we fight a war.
Sylvie?
Okay.
Yeah, let's go with C. Leonardo.
Sylvie, I think you're
There's
too
like
quiet.
boats in the background.
Right, ships in the background, right? Because this is going to be more of a naval war. They're fighting on the water more than they are fighting on land.
Yeah, the ships in the background, and they're on a beach, and their clothing are way different, so it kind of represents their countries on how
Absolutely. Yeah, so their clothing is completely different. You've got Great Britain with the crown, with the fancy clothing that you typically see a king wearing, right? America, it's much more simple. It's kind of representing, one, the different cultures, right? The government in America looks very different than the government in Great Britain, but it also represents the wealth. America was not nearly as wealthy as Great Britain, so you see that within the clothing as well. A couple more things for you guys to notice. Ellie said his crown is messed up. Absolutely. US is not bloody, Natalie said. Absolutely, these things are important to notice as well. The crown is broken. We're not only going to defeat their military, you see the injuries that King George III has, we're defeating their military, but the crown is messed up. We're going to destroy the crown, their very way of government. And that's a pretty bold statement for such a young and poor country as we were. You also notice that if you look at King George III's tailcoats, they're covered in sand. It looks like he just got knocked down and he's getting back up. He's already been defeated, but he's still trying to fight. President Madison, he doesn't have any injuries. The US doesn't have any injuries. He's still standing strong. He's still ready to fight. They're saying it's going to be a quick brawl between the two countries. America will come out untouched, but Great Britain will be defeated. As we go through, we'll see if that's really how that happens. This is General William Hull. William Hull was from Detroit. His mission was to go across the river into Canada and try to conquer lands in Canada. That was one of the reasons that we were fighting in the War of 1812, was try to gain land in Canada, and this guy is the one that's in charge of that. He has about 800 troops, and he's fighting against Great Britain, who has about 200 troops in Canada. So it's about a 4-to-1 ratio. Who's supposed to win? William Hull, right? He goes over there, he quickly starts losing and has to retreat. He tries a second time, quickly starts losing and has to retreat. So he tries a third time, quickly starts losing and has to retreat. Then President Madison will fire him because clearly he's not really good at his job, right? He can't lead an army, he can't win a battle, even though he has 4 times the amount of troops. So he gets fired. And he's one of the reasons that it's not necessarily a success or as big a success as it would have been in the War of 1812. And this man right here is Tecumseh. Tecumseh was the chief of the Shawnee tribe of Native Americans, and he also lived in Detroit. He came down to the southern United States to try to get all of the Native nations to band together and fight against America. So in the southern United States here in Tennessee and in the states that surround us, we've got 5 major nations that we call them. The Cherokee, the Creek, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, and the Seminole are all in the southeast area. Well, he tells all of them to get together, rise up, and defeat America. And a lot of the Native nations are on the fence about it. For instance, Cherokee Nation, they were assimilating to white culture. They were negotiating with America. They wanted to keep just negotiating as they were because they thought it would be the more peaceful way of doing things. Creek Nation was a little bit more divided. The Muskogee tribe, as they'd call themselves, there are 2 factions. The White Stick faction of Creek Nation was assimilating. They were negotiating and oftentimes fighting alongside us in times of war. The Red Stick faction of Creek Nation was not assimilating or negotiating, and oftentimes are fighting against us. So they're a little bit on the fence. Tecumseh says he's going to go up to his hometown of Detroit, stomp his foot 3 times, and when he does, they need to rise up and defeat America. But if Tecumseh stomps his foot in Detroit, are people in Georgia going to hear him? Probably not, right? They calculate the day that he's supposed to arrive in Detroit, and on that day, we have the New Madrid Earthquake. This is one of the largest earthquakes in American recorded history. It rattles church bells all the way from Boston, Massachusetts, down to Atlanta, Georgia. And it's on the day that he's supposed to arrive in Detroit and stomp his foot. So the Native nations in the Southeast think, okay, well, this guy must be onto something, right? He must be somebody powerful. We should listen to him. So they attack Fort Mims in Alabama. Creek Nation is the nation that's in Alabama at the time, so they're the ones that are attacking Fort Mims. They killed 250 men, women, and children in that fort. Andrew Jackson is the closest general to Alabama at the time. He's in Nashville. He travels down to Alabama to retaliate. And we get the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. You see the image there on the right, kind of has a horseshoe bend in the river there. That's where it gets its name. That's where that battlefield is. This is not really a battle. It's more of a massacre. While 45 American troops were killed during the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, 850 Red Stick warriors were killed. All remaining Red Sticks had to flee Creek Nation. They went down to Florida, joined Seminole Nation, And when Jackson showed up a few years later for the Seminole War, they meet him again. This is a very important battle to look at for two reasons. Number one, this is what gets Jackson promoted from Major General of the Tennessee Militia to General of the United States Army. Now he's a federally recognized troop. This sparks his military career, gives him a much easier political career later on. And we can't talk about Andrew Jackson as the general without talking about this battle. But the other reason that it's important to look at this battle is because if the president of the United States is willing to promote Jackson after this massacre, then you see the tone of America at the time, right? It's certainly what President Madison wanted, probably what most American people wanted as well. At the end of the day, what's it all about? Land, right? After the Creek War, which this will be called, Creek Nation cedes 23 million acres of land to the federal government. Now, if you're looking at Andrew Jackson as the guy that's responsible for this, getting 23 million acres of land for the federal government, that's successful, right? That really kind of makes a name for himself. And he starts to be viewed as the hero of 1812, right? As kind of one of America's greatest military heroes, but not fully yet. We'll see a little bit later how he is able to kind of really secure the name of hero. But first, we're going to look at a few more battles of the War of 1812. Now, we talked about the Creek War, America fighting against Creek Nation. That's happening at the same time we're fighting a war against Great Britain. A lot of historians will view the Creek War as just part of the War of 1812 because Great Britain was supplying all of the guns and ammunition to Creek Nation. So are they just allies? We're not quite sure. Some people view it as a separate war, but we're fighting both the native nations that are here in the United States and Great Britain, who's coming in and trying to invade our country. So at the same time as all of that's going on, Great Britain attacks Washington, D.C. Now, why is Washington, D.C. such an important city to our nation? How about Pine Room?
Put your hands down. Alt A. LTA.
Can you repeat that?
Guys,
well, for starters, it was where the White House was. It wasn't the White House, but it was where the president. Yeah. No.
Right,
No.
so that's where the White House is, right? The president lives there. How about Leonardo?
It's the capital of the United States.
It's the capital, right? It's kind of the seat of our government for the entire United States. That's why the White House is there. That's why the president lives there, the Capitol building as well. These are all very important buildings and structures for the United States. Well, Great Britain knows that. So they go in and they start burning all of the federal buildings to the ground. The Capitol building is burned. The US Treasury is burned. They're going through and just catching everything on fire. President Madison and his wife Dolly are sitting down to dinner. The table has been set, all of the food is served, and they quickly have to evacuate. Dolly Madison stays behind a little bit longer, and we often hear about her saving that giant portrait of George Washington, Declaration of Independence, other important documents. She does instruct for those to be saved just before she flees to safety herself. It's the enslaved community of the White House that stays behind and will grab them and bring them out. I like to give credit where it is due. Without Dolly Madison's instruction and great forethought, they would not have been saved. So she does deserve some credit, but it is the enslaved community that carries it out. The British troops come in, they see that the table's been served, they sit down, and they eat all the man's food. When they're done eating all the food, they burn the White House to the ground as well. Now, one good thing happening at the time, there's a major storm moving through. It brings tornadoes, causes more damage. That's not the good part. But it forces Great Britain to evacuate the city, stopping all of the damage they're inflicting. It also brings a lot of heavy rain, which will help put some of those fires out. So it limits the damage inflicted by Great Britain, but this is still a huge and devastating loss for America. Our president is homeless, our capital is up in flames. What are we going to do? Well, we need a new victory. We need to boost morale. We need to be able to stay in the game. And we're going to look at the Battle of Fort McHenry. This is Fort McHenry here on the coast of Baltimore. Off the coast are British ships firing upon the fort, and behind those British ships are civilian ships. The Battle of Fort McHenry lasts 25 hours. All of the lights in the fort are ordered to be extinguished. So for 25 hours between the dark of night, the clouds from storms, and the smoke from cannon fire, they're in total darkness. One of the civilian ships off the coast has 4 lawyers on board trying to negotiate the release of prisoners. And one of those lawyers is Francis Scott Key. Have y'all ever heard of Francis Scott Key before? Just kind of nod your head or shake your head if you haven't. No, some of you haven't, some of you have. Francis Scott Key, like I said, he was a lawyer sitting off the coast. He's probably scared out of his mind, right? Sitting on his ship, not knowing the outcome of the battle or the war as a whole. So he decides to sit down and write a poem. He writes a poem called The Star-Spangled Banner. Have y'all ever heard of that? Yeah. So in The Star-Spangled Banner, he says, the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air. For 25 hours, that was the only light he was able to see. Not knowing if that rocket's red glare was coming his way or the next bomb bursting in air is going to be over his ship. Do you think he's scared now? Probably. And he says, our flag is still there. We won this battle. In this poem, he's able to embody the emotions of all Americans at the time, because this is one of very few wars fought on our own soil and one of the most significant. Every American, whether they signed up for this war or not, is impacted by it. And he's able to put all of those emotions into words: the fear, the worry, the anxiety, but also the victory, the celebration, and the patriotism. And that's why years later, it becomes our national anthem, and it still is today. Now, we win in Fort McHenry, and Great Britain knows they need a new plan of attack. This right here is Francis Scott Key. I forgot that we had his image in here, so there you go. Great Britain has been trying the East Coast. They've been trying the Great Lakes region. They need a new plan. And what they want to do is take the Mississippi River. If they can get the Mississippi River, they get control of all of our supplies: guns, ammunition, economy, literally everything. But it also gives them access into the interior of our country. From this river, they can move east, while a group from the coast moves west and quickly choke us out. They know that this is their best plan of attack. Thankfully, President Madison knows that as well. So he sends Jackson down to New Orleans to defend the port city. And to see where Jackson's headquarters is today, in modern times, this Google image shows Jackson's headquarters right there in downtown New Orleans, right on the river, right? Obviously, New Orleans did not look like this when he got there. It looked more like this. So you've got New Orleans sitting up here. The way that this river worked out, because of the curve in the river there, Great Britain had to come straight on, right? They couldn't go around and flank America from the side. They couldn't go from the other side because all up here is marsh and swampland, because Lake Pontchartrain. Now, with having to go straight on at America, it gives America a huge advantage. They get to see them coming. This image shows General Packingham, the general of the U.S. or of Great Britain's army, after he'd just been shot. You see a lot of people on the ground there. You see horses on the ground. This is a very devastating battle. And this shows a little bit closer up, kind of both sides of it, right? You've got Jackson and his men standing up there on that rise. You've got Great Britain down here with General Packingham standing in the middle. Now, while this is very dramatized and it is not accurate, we're going to talk about that in a second. But what I want to talk about first are the numbers. Andrew Jackson and his men had just over 5,000 soldiers. Great Britain had just over 8,000. Great Britain is the most powerful, most heavily trained army in the world. Jackson and his men were called squirrel hunters and possum chasers because that's all they really were. They were frontiersmen with guns, freed and enslaved blacks, Native Americans, and even pirates. It's really a mix of anybody that has a gun and wants to shoot a redcoat. They have no formal training, no experience together, going up against the most powerful army in the world while being far outnumbered. Who do you think is going to win? By all accounts, America is supposed to lose this battle. Now, the Battle of New Orleans only lasts 37 minutes. At the end of the 37 minutes between the killed, wounded, and missing, Great Britain has lost over 2,000 men, and America lost 71. Of the killed alone, Great Britain lost 291 men, and America lost 13. Of the 13 Americans killed, 6 of them were loading a cannon. They didn't clean it out beforehand. The cannon exploded and it killed the 6 men that were loading it. So only 7 of those deaths are truly at the hands of Great Britain. In 37 minutes, Andrew Jackson and his men have defeated the most powerful army in the world. An hour after the first shot rings out, Jackson is sitting down writing a letter to President Madison, talking about that victory. Now, the city of New Orleans is celebrating, right? Everybody's excited about this victory. They didn't want the city of New Orleans or the Mississippi River to be in the hands of Great Britain, so they're all very excited about it. That's why today you have Jackson Square in the city of New Orleans. They still celebrate the legacy of Jackson and his heroic efforts in the Battle of New Orleans. And Rachel, Andrew Jackson's wife, is up here at the Hermitage. Andrew has been gone for months. She misses her husband dearly. So she goes down to New Orleans before she even knows the battle has taken place. She doesn't care if she's showing up in a war zone. Nobody is going to stop her from seeing her husband. But thankfully, she arrived a few days after the battle. So as you can see here, all of the people partying in the streets, she said when she arrived in New Orleans, they were partying so much in the streets, she couldn't even bring her carriage through. Then, as news started spreading outside of New Orleans, the country is celebrating. Meanwhile, in a small, tiny village in Belgium, the Treaty of Ghent is being signed. Now, a treaty, it officially ends a war, right? So the Treaty of Ghent, it officially ends the War of 1812. This was signed by Great Britain on December 24th, 1814. The Battle of New Orleans was January 8th, 1815. So historians debate whether that battle is part of the war at all, right? Great Britain's already signed the treaty. Is the war over? But if it is part of the war, is it still significant if Great Britain was ready to call it quits? I would argue yes to both of those because both parties have to sign the treaty in order for the war to officially be over. Great Britain has signed it, but they have to send it across the Atlantic Ocean. And until it's signed by President Madison and ratified by Congress, the war is still in full effect. More than that, even the British troops that are in America fighting this war had no idea their own king had just signed a treaty to end that war. So it is part of the war. But is it significant if Great Britain was ready to call it quits? Again, I would say yes, because until President Madison signs the treaty, either party can still pull out. If Great Britain wins in New Orleans, they can dictate all the terms of that treaty. If America wins, we have more negotiating power. And like I said a little while ago during the Creek War, at the end of the day, it's all about land, right? Who gets that port city? Who gets the river? So it is significant to the nation, but it is even more important to Andrew Jackson, because winning in that Battle of New Orleans is what sparks him into national fame. That letter that Jackson wrote talking about the victory in New Orleans arrived in Washington, D.C. just a few days before the Treaty of Ghent. So to President Madison and the rest of the nation, it looks like Jackson just single-handedly won the war. He writes a letter saying we came out victorious in New Orleans, and a few days later, President Madison gets the treaty to end the war. Now, looking back, we know that's not how that happened, right? Communication at the time was very difficult. It was much quicker to send a letter from New Orleans to Washington, D.C. than it was from Europe to Washington, D.C. So because of that, it makes it look like Jackson single-handedly won the war. But some people debate whether that battle is even significant. Either way, this battle is what sparked Jackson's national fame. Anytime you see Jackson's face with the word hero, we're talking about the Battle of New Orleans specifically. And 13 years later, in 1828, this is what gets Jackson elected president. They see him as a strong leader. somebody that can bring us through whatever comes our way and bring us through victoriously. Now, does anybody have questions about that? And I'll leave the presentation up for a minute in case we need to go back. If you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can unmute and ask your questions there.
Oscar, go ahead.
I have a question.
Okay.
How did President Andrew Jackson die?
How did he die? Congestive heart failure. He was 78 years old and life expectancy for a man was 52. So really, he just died of old age. Claws raised their hand, yes.
How long was the war? Was it just a year or was it any longer?
It starts in 1812 and the Battle of New Orleans is 1815. So it's about 3 years long. Leonardo asked what battle tactic did he use? He uses several tactics in the Battle of New Orleans. So like I said, Great Britain has to come right straight on at them, right? So that gives them an advantage already. But in the image that I showed you a little bit ago, if I can pull that up again. This one here, Jackson and his men are standing on that rise. They're shooting down at Great Britain. Great Britain has to shoot up at them. It gives them a huge advantage there as well. Jackson tells his men not to shoot until they can see the whites of the British soldiers' eyes. That way they're close enough to where they can't miss. Also, like I said, Jackson and his men were called squirrel hunters and possum chasers. In order to shoot a squirrel, you have to be pretty accurate. So when you look at the weapons, America has mostly rifles and some muskets. Great Britain has mostly muskets and some rifles. And rifles are going to be a lot more accurate. That means that the barrel, inside the barrel of that rifle has a spiral. It turns that bullet into a spiral and it throws it like kind of like a football, right? With that spiral versus a musket that's just kind of bouncing around in there and falls out more or less. So it's going to be a lot more accurate. And that gives them a huge advantage as well. Tony, how was it that Jackson's troops are able to do so much damage to superior forces? Again, a lot of those same reasons. There's a couple other key players within it. Jean Lafitte is a pirate, actually, and he joins Jackson's forces. Jean Lafitte goes to Great Britain and makes a deal with them. You know, if we fight for you, what can you give us? Great Britain offers them obviously a lot of money. America doesn't have as much money. They go to Jackson, they say, what can you offer us? Great Britain offered us this much. And Jackson basically says, we can't offer you any money, but what we can do is offer you freedom. You are all wanted criminals. As pirates, you're criminals. If you fight for us, we'll pardon all of your crimes. If you don't fight for us, we'll arrest you on the spot and you won't fight for anybody. And it's hard to argue with that. So the pirates can help get them out if they need to retreat. They're going to know the waterways. They're going to know the land a lot more. So there's a lot of key players in that as well. What was the biggest battle of the War of 1812? I would say the Battle of New Orleans really is the biggest battle during the war. Another few really important aspects of it, like I said, with Washington, D.C., right? That I think is what gives America really that sense of urgency, right? They burned down our capital city. They burned down the Capitol building. They burned down the White House. We need to fight. We need to stay in this. So I think it's what gives America that charge, that push to really win the war. But I would say the Battle of New Orleans is the biggest battle. How many battles were in the war? Total, I want to say right around 13. 12 or 13. And I'm trying to look back at, there's a lot of small battles, especially in kind of the New York, the Finger Lake region, that we don't necessarily get into or talk about. But I want to say in total, it's about 12 or 13.
I think the Pine Room has a question. Pine Room, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yes, sorry about that. I was looking at the chat.
Two quick ones. Claire, did you want to go first?
No.
Oh, okay. When?
My question is, throughout the British and America, so I want to know how many losses both sides had, like how many dead?
In the battle or the war?
Entire war.
in the entire war? I don't know the answer to that. That's a great question that I'm going to have to go back and look into. Maybe I can find the answer before our afternoon session. Yeah, I don't know the total answer. I will say that overall, I do think that America is going to face more loss than Great Britain. If you look at it in strictly numbers, I do think Great Britain is going to have the upper hand because of the battles like I talked about with William Hull going into Canada, right? How he quickly starts losing 3 different times. Things like that, I think, are going to give Great Britain the upper hand. The battle that had the most casualties is the Battle of Niagara Falls up in New York. I believe America had about 850 Americans that were killed during that battle. Somebody asked, some discredit the efforts of the untrained troops in Kentucky and Tennessee. I don't agree with that. I do think that the efforts of those troops in Kentucky and Tennessee definitely give America the upper hand. I mean, Tennessee is called the volunteer state because of the War of 1812. When asked for about 1,000 troops, Jackson comes with about 1,500. So Tennessee is really stepping up. They're really volunteering even more. And those numbers are definitely going to help the efforts, but also, like I said, those frontiersmen, those squirrel hunters, and their accuracy are going to be a huge advantage. So I wouldn't discredit them at all. Ellie asked if the columns in the Arboretum are all that's left. I don't actually know what was left from the Capitol building because they don't have like photographs or anything of it. A lot of it's just drawn images or portraits of it. From those portraits, they make it look like nothing was left. But obviously those are not going to be super accurate. And I'm not quite sure how much was left, but not much at all. Canada was still part of Great Britain. It was still a colony of Great Britain at the time. So we were trying to get that land not from Canada itself. We were trying to get that land from Great Britain. We also were trying to get Florida from Spain during the War of 1812. We didn't get either of those things. The Treaty of Ghent will say that all land holdings prior to the War of 1812 are what is going to be prior to the war. Sorry, I was reading Tony's comment. All land holdings prior to the War of 1812 are what's going to be left at the end of the War of 1812, meaning we don't gain or lose any land during this. So we don't get any land from Canada. We don't get any land from Florida. We don't get Florida until Jackson goes down there in 1818 and fights the Seminole War. All right, so Tony said about 15,000 Americans and about 8,600 British and Canadian soldiers. So yeah, that's going to be a huge difference there, right? So when you look at those numbers, it's not even close.
Einram, did you have another question?
Yes, we do.
What color did America wear and what color did Britain wear?
So Britain wears red. You can see in this image here, Britain's still wearing red coats, just like they did in the Revolutionary War. They actually still do today. America up top, you see a lot of men in blue. And for any formal US Army uniform, it's going to be blue like that. But like I said, not a lot of them were formal soldiers, right? They were frontiersmen. They were freed and enslaved blacks. They were Native Americans and pirates. None of those people are going to have a formal uniform. They're going to be wearing whatever is available to them. So if you look closely, you can see that man kind of just to the left of Andrew Jackson. He's wearing just a frontier kind of frock coat, right? It would be made out of probably deer hide is going to be the most common in this area. It's just a very simple coat. And that's most of what they would be wearing. That's also going to kind of hurt America because they don't necessarily know who's on their side, right? If nobody's wearing a formal uniform, you don't know if they're on your team, if they're not on your team. So that's why countries wear formal uniforms now, is to be able to distinguish themselves. Why are the British hats so big? I don't have an answer to that. It's just the style. Every country's uniform is going to have different things about it. The fact that they're wearing kilts, right? This image is not going to be accurate by any means. We use this just kind of show the two sides of it and show that rampart that Jackson's men are standing on. Great Britain did not wear kilts during the War of 1812. Only the Scottish Highlanders wore kilts, and by the War of 1812, they weren't wearing them anymore either. Those had gone out of style. I guess they realized that fighting a war in a skirt was really difficult. So they switched to pants to try to protect themselves from the brush and anything else that they're going to be traveling through. Looks like Pine maybe has another question.
I was wondering if when they burned down the White House, was anyone in there? And if so, did they die?
There were no deaths from the White House being burned down because it was not in the middle of the day, but it was still early enough to where everybody was awake. They saw it coming. It was one of the last buildings that Great Britain was able to get to. So they saw it all coming. They were able to react. They obviously got the president out first to get him to safety, but everybody was able to evacuate the White House and there was no casualties there. Leonardo, yes.
Why do they hold up their flags?
They hold up their flags. One, again, like I said, this image isn't really accurate. So they're not going to be standing in the middle of the battle holding a flag. That's not going to be super safe for them. They can't defend themselves. But they do bring their flags into battle so that they know they're representing their countries, right? They have their flag. They're telling the other team, we are Great Britain, we are America, so that they know who they're fighting against. Just like you see there at the bottom, there's a drum. They would have a drummer that's leading them into battle as well. Pine has another question.
I have something I thought I saw. We looked this up earlier today, but I saw that there was a body. I found out that there was a body at the bottom of Niagara Falls. Do you think that had anything to do with the war?
I don't know about that body. I would say probably not, because they're going to make any effort to get all bodies from the battle back home. If they're British, they'd be sending them back to Great Britain. If they're America, they'd try to get them back to their home for a respectful burial. So I would say probably not, but who knows, maybe. Leonardo has a question.
How many Capitol buildings were destroyed?
So just the main Capitol building in Washington, D.C. was destroyed. I did hear that there were kind of some small skirmishes in other capital cities, but really the biggest damage is going to be the nation's Capitol building in Washington, D.C.
All right. Any other questions?
Y'all have had some great questions, so thank you very much. I'm glad we did finish a little bit early so you guys had time for all of those questions.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I just want to thank you all again for coming. It was so great to have you, and we hope to see you again. And of course, Patrick, thank you so much. We really appreciate you sharing all your knowledge and answering everybody's questions.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining us today. If you do come up with more questions, you can go on our website, thehermitage.com, and find my contact information. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.